Welcome back to part 2 of the Star Wars Connection podcast. Rey and Kylo Ren as Adam and Eve.
What we seem to have is two young people who might be attracted to each other, and they already have this union through the Force. There are a lot of interesting trees on the canvas, but Adam and Eve never saved the world. They repopulated it, but they didn't do like a heroic saving of the world. So now we have to look at what evidence is there that they have crossed into the realm of potential saviors. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Vay?
Okay, so first of all, I wouldn't say that those first couples didn't save the world, right? Like you have different ways of saving the world. Chosen one saves the world with some big act of self-sacrifice / heroism that others cannot do. Like you can't repeat that thing. It's done, and then the world is saved, and everyone is happy and worships the chosen one. So that's one way to save the world. But Adam and Eve type of saving the world is really a beginning of the process that many others will carry on in the future. So in this case, in Star Wars case, based on all the prophecies that are told in The Force Awakens by Lord Santaka and Snoke, saving the world would be the rise of the new Jedi, because without the Jedi there is no balance in the Force. So these Rey and Kylo would be the first Jedi couple after the Jedi apocalypse. So those new Jedi that will rise, and eventually there would be more of their kind, not through, like having millions of babies. Of course, like they could have babies as well, but this is more a spiritual type of, let's say, multiplying.
And also, it kind of, we've talked a lot about force balance, and as we go on, we're going to talk about how this Adam and Eve aspect, this reverse Adam and Eve, it's not just about having children, and restoring the Jedi. It's about also restoring balance, because something is still wrong. So in that sense, the fact that they have to have like a certain kind of power, they have to be their own chosen one, so to speak, and that works because, Rey is extremely force sensitive, and she has unbelievable force aptitude. Yes, she downloads the information from Kylo Ren, but she couldn't act it out if she didn't have the aptitude or the ability. She, like we have talked about, comes from the desert, and she beats Kylo Ren, though, he had a wound the size of a bowling ball in his stomach, and he was in a very bad mental state after killing his father, so I don't think she will always beat him, but she does beat a force sensitive without any training. Ren is the same way. He is extremely force sensitive. Though he does not come from the desert, he is the descendant of the chosen one. He's descendant of Luke, who I kind of see as a John the Baptist type of figure, another prophet who has come from the desert. And because Luke helps Vader on his mission. And frankly, Kylo Ren has the blood of the desert. Like Vay was saying, Moses is one of the prophets in the Bible. Well, he was born and raised as a prince, but in the end, he was a Jewish man, but he didn't connect with that until he had a life-changing, divinely created experience. And that's the point where he changed. That's when he left, the home of the Pharaoh and went to be back with his people. And I would actually argue, moving forward, that Kylo Ren's moment is when he sees Rey catch that lightsaber, because when he gets that look on his face, he is just utter awe. And you would think that a Darksider would just be like flat out pissed. Like, what the heck? You got my lightsaber. Instead, he is like in awe. Something has changed with him and he behaves differently after that incident. And then just kind of finishing up that both of these people are extraordinary. These are just not like, you know, run-of-the-mill Jedi types that you might have seen in the old Clone Wars. He does stuff, like, the whole thing was that Anakin was supposed to be the most powerful Jedi ever. Well, Kylo Ren is doing stuff that Anakin never did, or Vader never did. Vader never stopped a blaster bolt, like, midair, and then had a whole conversation and, you know, took a guy out and then released it, you know. And then Vader also never like went into somebody's mind and got such specific information. It was always fleeting. And when he interrogated Leia, he had to have that, you know, I'm thinking about Robot Chicken. He had to have Dr. Ball put the needle in Leia. He wasn't getting it out. Kylo Ren gets that out without any, you know, pharmaceutical assistance. So basically you have two people, and that's what I kind of mean when like the Force is playing chess with the two of them. They're both extraordinarily talented, and we don't really, and this is just the beginning, we don't even know where they're going with that.
Sorry, if I can add something, when you mentioned Moses, right? You know, like Moses' story is really about, you know, like family as well. You know, like he was raised in one family, you know, like Egyptian prince, prince, etc. But he was actually Jewish man, and when he had the life-changing experience, that's the family that he chose. And with Kylo Ren, the same thing happens on desert planet of Jakku when Lord Santeka says, you cannot deny the truth that is your family. You know, like it's a big, big moment of that trial of the desert that we were talking about, that Star Wars figures, the main figures have that, you know, like have roots in the Judeo-Christian traditions. So that's really for him about choosing the dark family or, you know, like the light family. And it happens on the planet, on the desert planet and orbiting the desert planet. And that's where he has the call to the light at the moment of awakening in the Force. But yeah, so.
Yeah, actually, that's because there's kind of, he does have a moment and he struggles actually because he was very dark when he was on Jakku.
Right.
But he lets Finn go. And
oh, yes, yeah.
He lets Finn go, and that's yeah, we're going to get into how, like, basically there's multiple calls from the Force to both of them. They're not only both extraordinarily Force talented, the Force is talking to both of them. And for some reason, Kylo Ren lets Finn go. He has no reason to help him at all. And I think that's part of the reason he gets so mad at him at the end, was because a lot of stuff wouldn't have happened had he just like took out Finn then, but something told him not to. And so, you know, like but you know, you've talked a lot about this, that basically, you know, both of them have, you know, had multiple Force Awakens. Her light, he's getting things from light and the dark, and they're getting, you know, calls from the Force at the same time. That is just like completely unheard of in the series. Vay, you're the goddess on this, so I want you to take the lead.
Okay. And now, I mean, like, I want to say about the calls. The Force is calling to Rey and Kylo Ren, and this is something that had never happened in Star Wars. In the original trilogy, you have Luke Obi-Wan comes and he's like, well, your father, blah, 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 let's come to, like have an adventure. And pretty much similar things happens in the prequel trilogy when Qui-Gon discovers Anakin and says, well, like you're strong with the Force, I want to train you. But you did not have a case where basically a character is shown to be called by the Force, which is when Rey received the call from the lightsaber, and at the same time you have another situation when a character says, "I'm hearing the call." I mean, like, I'm hearing the call to the light. That's what Kylo says. So this is really, like moving away from like sci-fi and really going into mythology, for the, religious and fantasy, like realm, and it's very, very specific, very unique for these two characters. And again, like not only did we have the call, but we have two characters at the same time, which like never happened. So,
and actually what was like crazy amazing, and you picked this up, I didn't pick this up, but basically her awakening, because she doesn't seem to have too many Force abilities while she's on Jakku, and people have talked about how Jakku may be like a suppressive kind of environment for Force. We don't really know yet, but she starts doing crazy stuff. As soon as she leaves the planet, she starts having these fantastic flying skills, and she helps Finn with the Rathtars, and her awakening basically equals Kylo Ren's call to the light.
Absolutely, yes, yeah.
Because she does that. And after she starts having these moments, he goes see Snoke. He says, "There's an awakening. Have you felt it?" And then he goes back to his room and has a talk with Vader, and he says he feels the call to the light. Like that is a perfect little moment of how the Force is playing chess with them. And then she ends up having her call to the light, and then I'll let you jump back in.
Yes, I mean, like that's totally what's happening, and is completely unique to the sequel trilogy. Like we have call to the light, or the Force calling two characters, not just one, but two characters. And even J.J. Abrams confirmed that the Force Awakens actually applies to two awakenings. He said it was the Force awakening in the young woman and the dark side in the villain. But as we just discussed, the Force is calling them at the same time, which is unheard of. However, for the story of Adam and Eve, to me at least, the most interesting call is island in the ocean, or Ahch-To, the planet of the first Jedi temple, or Jedi Eden, where the Jedi began. So what is going on here is this, that Rey, being lonely and stuck on a desert planet, had trouble sleeping. So every night before sleep, she would imagine an ocean with an island in it. And from her perspective, that was just her imagination. But we'll find out at the end of the movie that it was not her imagination, it was an actual place. So in my opinion, the most important moment in The Force Awakens, Kylo Ren sees that island in the ocean, which is basically the Force indirectly calling to him, or calling to him through Rey, because he was allowed to see that moment. And we have them experiencing that moment at the same time. He sees it in her mind, and it's a very pleasant thing for him, because this is the moment when he smiles for the only time in the movie. He cracks a little bit of smile. And So at the end of the movie, when Rey arrives to Ahch-To and she sees that island in the ocean, you see on her face that she remembers that's what Kylo Ren said, like you imagine that ocean. And it's fantastic because it's a visual presentation of the call. It's the Force calling to these two characters at the same time, and you actually have a visual presentation what they see, like what the call is.
And that's the most important one because they see it at the exact same moment.
Yes, and it's Jedi Eden, so basically it says, "Come back, my children,"
Yeah, and the thing that kind of like adds, because there's layers of calling that makes them the Adam and Eve figure, is because that's not the first moment that something happens. She gets her call to the light with the Force back. And what calls her? A lightsaber. And that lightsaber, he may not have been lying. That may really have been his lightsaber. That may have been gifted to him. Why is his lightsaber calling her?
He says it's his. He said that lightsaber, it belonged to me. So,
yes.
So from his point of view, it's his, then it's his, right?
Yes, and he's not a liar, actually. He doesn't really tell lies.
He never lies to her. Never. He's always honest.
Yes. And, and then the minute she rejects that call to the Force, she runs out of the room. She runs down those stairs like Cinderella, and she goes right into the lush Garden of Eden and runs right into him, into her Eve. She's Adam, he's Eve. The Force is actually, since she's imagined that place, the Force is called to her whole life.
Yes, yeah.
It's called to her whole life. In the novels, they talk about she actually knows him in some way from a nightmare of a dream. She's seen something of him. Something's recognizable about him. The same thing with him. He has that when the lieutenant is telling him what happened and he mentions, oh, well, there was a girl with them. He goes nuts. He's like, what girl? And, they're a girl I've heard so much about. And, well, what has he heard? He heard 2 sentences about.
One of which was she went into the woods.
Yes.
Exactly. Like Kylo over exaggeration.
Yes. So one of them, she went into the woods, and so there's a sense that he, especially because of the book when he has that moment of awe when she catches the lightsaber. In the book, it says it's you. He knows something about her. I don't believe for a second he knew her physically before, but I think there was something, they had dreams or visions, just like her whole vision, her whole Force back was full of him. He was like 80% of that whole thing. I think he's seen something that reflects her as well. And they even had that moment in the script where he's reading her mind, and they actually have that moment where they recognize something in each other.
The energy.
Yes.
They recognize the energy, yes, yeah.
Yes.
And they're startled. It says they're startled because they recognize the energy, yeah.
And then, like, what's exciting is I actually think that Kylo, because he's in a vulnerable way, he's not just getting, like, calls from the light. He's getting calls from the dark, too. And I think he is called to the dark when he kills Han, and there's a is it Snoke calling him, is it the dark? He gets a call and he kills Han, but what's interesting is that when he kills Han, he's actually weakened by it. He doesn't pull the Anakin where he gets all red-eyed. He gets weakened. So what is that? Is that the Force stepping in saying, no, we don't want you there? Or is that the soul that taught his mother how to use the Force from when he was a baby? Who is that? Is that person, pushing up? But even then, though, because there's that interesting part when he kills Han where he looks like he's going to go with Han, and his eyes, Adam Driver does such a beautiful job with it. He looks excited, and then the light goes out, and then just something happens with the eyes. Like they get this very dead kind of look to them, and the music changes, and it gets this like kind of sound, which is like the Snoke music. And you hear, when he chases after them, he hasn't fallen to the dark yet, but he's in a bad way. And he's erratic and he's vicious to Finn. And my theory, and I think you share this too, Vay, is that if he caught that lightsaber, he was going to be done. That Snoke music was playing when he was reaching for the lightsaber, but instead she catches the lightsaber. She does it, and when it looks like all is lost for him, he gets another call to the light, I think, and that's her catching the lightsaber, where all of a sudden he's like, everything's over, and then he sees her with it, and he is like, wait a minute. Something happened here, and all of a sudden his whole demeanor changes. He gets a lot more calm afterwards. He doesn't fight her. People's like, oh, she beat him. He wasn't fighting her. The guy knows how to fight. And he lets her get the advantage on him, and he shows her, he could have pushed her off that cliff how many times when she was powering up on the Force. He doesn't do that. He stands there like, oh yes, I'm in awe of you. I'm going to teach you the ways of the Force. His whole thing changes. He's like in a whole different place now. And so that's the amazing part. I don't know. I'm just getting really excited now, but
No, I'm totally excited about this concept because it's in the movie, obviously, it's there. It isn't a theory, a Snoke, whatever character, right? But it's there, they're Adam and Eve, and how it's going to be played out, we don't know, but it's set up, so it's there. But I just want to add some stuff, to what you said. I think it was the visual guide or dictionary that had that quote about Han slaying that the Force chose its champion of the dark side when Kylo Ren was on the catwalk. And this is very interesting to me because when you said that he felt weakened, who was it? Was it the Force? Was it Kylo? And the big thing about Adam and Eve's story is disobedience or free will, because they were ordered not to eat from the tree, but they did it regardless. So I'm anticipating that even though the Force is playing chess with Rey and Kylo, that in the end they're not going to do exactly like the Force says, but they're going to carve their own way, and that's how we are going to get the new beginning with the new Jedi or whatever they're going to be. But there has to be that moment of free will when, they kind of take the destiny in their own hands, as opposed to being, pushed toward destiny, without having anything to say.
Oh, I think you're right about that. Oh, wow. Okay. We've talked over you, Felix. You get in here a little bit.
Yes, come on, talk.
Yeah, no, it's perfect because you do bring up that, the darkness is calling to him. And so then that does sort of beg the question of, well, if the dark side is calling to him, but these are our two Adam and Eve figures, then, how does that fit in? Isn't he still in the dark? And how would that work? But what I find interesting, especially when we talk about these two creating the new Jedi, is all this discussion that's sprung up around. So we had the movie title of Space Bear, and the panda is it's a symbol of yin and yang. And then if you think about in Eastern cultures, you've got this representation of the yin and yang. So you've got light on one side, dark in the other, and then there's a little bit of each in both of them, which seems to be a pretty good representation of Kylo and Rey right now.
Oh, yeah.
But here is, in the Eastern traditions, is that this dark side isn't necessarily all evil, right? So there are traits to take from it. And this fits in really well with this Jungian stuff. I've mentioned Jung in the art podcast before. There's the very Jungian shot at the beginning of the interrogation with a shadow figure peering up at the ray of light. And what was fun about that was a couple of weeks later, then here comes Ryan Johnson on Twitter, and he's telling someone what he read, that kind of helped him like in preparation for episode 8. And so he referenced 2 books. He said one by Carl Jung, which is Modern Man in Search of a Soul. And then there's Robert Bly, whose book was a little book about the human shadow. And so with Jung, the concept is that that type of psychology, that analytical psychology, is all about integration. So taking the different parts of yourself and bringing them into wholeness. And the 2 big figures that we are focused on here are, and they're usually represented as like a hero and a villain or an anti-hero character in stories, is your persona, which is what you show to other people and how you think of yourself. And then there's the shadow side, which is everything that you repress, hide, deny, project onto other people. And it's not necessarily all bad. There can be some very dark traits, but the idea is that it isn't all evil. And in order to become a whole person, you need to integrate that. And if you're talking, I'm going to get a little psych nerd here on you guys, but
go for it, because I love this whole persona because like Kylo Ren's the persona and the shadow is actually Ben, you know.
Right. But there's this, if you think about it, like analytical psychology was conceptualized before, we had EKGs, or we could really look at what exactly the different parts of the brain do. So in modern terms, you can almost compare them to like this, the top part of your brain. So the front brain is kind of that light side, or it's the part that's in charge of decision making and morals and higher thinking. And then that dark side, or the shadow side, you can kind of think of as the reptile brain, where it's in charge of like sleeping and eating and mating, and it's in charge of fight or flight. So it's what gives you fear and anger. And some things that are really thought of as dark side traits, but if you didn't have a reptile brain, you wouldn't have a pulse, right? Because you need that to survive. So to me, if I had to make a guess about where they're going with the direction of this trilogy, because you think about the Jedi and how they're way too much in like this esoteric, like they're very stringent and strict, and you can have no attachments. And so that creates an imbalance. So then the Sith arise, and you've got the Sith who are all about giving into all of their base emotions and committing heinous acts. Well, what do you need to find in order to create a balance in the Force? You need to figure out which of those traits work from both sides. So if I had to make a guess, I would say the new Jedi, like you can have love, and you can have family, and all of these things that aren't necessarily like evil, but then you're still going to be eschewing you are going to be eschewing evil acts like murder and things like that. So
yeah, and actually to sort of pick up on that, like a couple of things to sort of follow, because I've listened to some of the Robert Bly stuff, and I'm still, learning more about it. But he has this great phrasing where he talks about the shadow is all the stuff that you have to shove into your bag to like fit into the society that you're in. And think about what the Jedi made Anakin shove in his bag. Like somehow it was bad that the kid loved his mother. Somehow it was bad that he missed her. All this kind of stuff. And, and so what is, let's just say Luke taught Ben the same way. Ben looks like an emotional dude to me. He seems like he has a lot of feelings. The parents are very, fairly volatile kind of people. They're not going to have that Obi-Wan kind of kid who's just going to be, very placid and he's going to have a lot of strong emotions. So what's Luke going to tell him? Luke's going to tell him what Yoda told him, which is, you shove that nobody wants to see your emotions. Nobody wants to see that passion, that anger. You get upset. You're sensitive to this. And I don't know. I personally think that shoving down is probably a lot. That is a big responsibility of why, like, both Vader and Ben seem to freak out at some point, because once you shove things down, you repress them. It's like putting a beach ball under the water. And at some point, that thing is just going to come up and hit you in the face. And things get radicalized. Like Bly says, stuff gets angry down there and it regresses. And when it comes out, it's ugly. And had anybody just like said, appreciated that the fact that, a very good friend of mine told me that the wise mind is the mixture of your emotional mind and your logical mind. The emotional mind is the reptile brain, the hind brain you were talking about. The rational mind is the frontal lobe that you're talking about, the executive function, which the Jedi love. But real wisdom takes into account that a whole person is made up of both. And that's why, we look at the the prequel trilogy, like Vader kills all the light. Like he just goes nuts and kills everybody, kills all the rationality. And then with Luke's help in the original trilogy, he kills all the dark. But still, that was supposed to be the goal, to get rid of the dark. But what if dark isn't, like you said, what if dark doesn't have to equal evil? Maybe dark, because my understanding of the Eastern philosophy is that things only get evil when the light and the dark get out of balance. When that... Is that correct, Felix? Am I understanding that?
And you're going to have, that's essentially it. You're going to have acts that are evil no matter what, like murder, cold-blooded murder, always going to be, that's a cross-cultural, like that's evil.
Absolutely.
But what I find interesting is we actually have like a direct reference to, like they just flat out call it the Shadow in the Clone Wars. Yoda goes, as part of his training through the Force at the end of the series, goes into this, a cave, and he literally confronts his own shadow. And it's actually kind of creepy looking for this cartoon, but it's, what happens is, and it's it's this Jungian stuff, what happens is Yoda first denies it. So he's like, I don't know who you are. Who are you? I have no idea. Even though, it looks just like him, just in evil form. And so the more that he denies it, the stronger it gets and the more aggressive it gets. Until finally Yoda kind of has this epiphany and he's like, no, I know who you are. You're my shadow. You're arrogance. You're part of me. And so this act of naming it, calms it down. It brings it under control. And then in the moment when Yoda says, but I'm in charge, I have control over you, that's when the shadow disappears. That's when it's integrated back into him and he's a whole person. So that's kind of how I see this Jungian stuff with its relation to episode 8 too, is like you have to, Kylo and Rey are both going to have to accept that there are some traits that are a part of them, and that make them who they are, but they're in control of them. They decide how to use them.
But I don't think they have I don't know if they have the tools yet for that. And that's the interesting part, because I don't think everybody agrees with me on this one, but one of the reasons I think, it's interesting that they did that in the Clone Wars with Yoda, but I wonder if that message was imparted to Luke of integrating that side, because you see what we got Return of the Jedi was Vader killing all of the dark, and that was supposed to save everything. And but obviously when you read like Aftermath, Life Debt, like the dark is still there. Like all kinds of crazy bad stuff is still happening. And in a way, this is my personal crack theory, but I actually see that the birth of Ben, who is supposed to be like half dark and half light, so soon after Luke's victory was actually kind of an act of defiance by the Force. That the Force users, this all or nothing approach, had gotten it wrong again, because Ben is kind of a challenge because he is born an innocent child, and yet from birth he could never be like that perfect, like super rational Jedi, and yet he doesn't fit because he has too much compassion, he doesn't fit the Sith box either. And that's where I kind of think of some sort of integration is going to happen with Rey and Kylo as Adam and Eve. You get more support with this, where back to Lor San Tekka, without the Jedi there is no balance. But what's important, he says the word balance. He does not say that the dark side must be defeated. He doesn't say that, actually. And then when you look at the Mortis trilogy from the Clone Wars, you have a father figure, and he wants to still unturned Anakin to take his place and maintain the balance between the light daughter and the dark son. And Kylo actually is kind of like a perfect mix of both of them. And that's why I think he, in his current status, he is just a figure of misery. He literally is torn apart. All light doesn't work for him, neither does all the dark. So he's this epitome of the dark light conflict made manifest in his soul. But like Vay said before, because he's capable of being dark and light, he can be the dark to Rey's light. He can be her balance. So even if you dismiss that, like Vay said, J.J. Abrams indicated in the Force Awakens documentary that the two of them are mutual awakenings, that she is an awakening in the light, but that the dark side awakened in the villain, and that is Kylo Ren, who, and going back to Jung, I see that as kind of the persona, the outward persona of the tortured Ben living out the dark side of himself. And just like Vay said, the Art of the Force Awakens book says that the Force chose its champion in the dark side. So here we have Adam and Eve. Each side of the Force will have a champion. They are yin and yang, and because the sequel trilogy is going to have roots in the belief in the Force, by having Luke find the first Jedi Temple, the sequel trilogy is having both the light and the dark, Rey and Kylo, going back to the beginning of all. The Force is calling both the dark and the light to the Force tree.
Right. And then I think before we closed out, we kind of wanted to mention a couple of or a few examples in modern fantasy, which is...
Actually, there was one more bit that I wanted to go into before we closed out, but Vay, did you have anything to add on to that? Because I wanted to talk about Force consummation a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. I just want to say that it looks to me that they are definitely going with integration, as you mentioned, and Adam and Eve concept is perfect for that. Because you have a man and a woman, so it isn't just one person that basically is going to destroy one side and keep the other side. So you have two of them, and one at the moment represents the light, the other one represents the dark, but we know that they are mixed because Rey exhibited some dark traits at the end of the snow fight. And likewise, Kylo showed many light traits. And we know that they are constantly called by the Force, probably from the both sides. So it's it definitely seems like they are going with the concept of integration instead of one destroying the other. Now, it's possible that they will be asked to destroy one another. And that's where I think we are going to have their own will that is going to disobey such order, and will get those new Jedi, the integration and everything. And of course, like another thing that I just wanted to mention briefly when you mentioned Jedi love and love as a concept and how the Jedi dogma try to repress it. I think that that's one of the reasons why they are going with Adam and Eve, that we are going to see a change in the Jedi lore for those new ones, whatever happens, because the idea that they all go to the place where the Jedi began, that we have Luke, who apparently is representation of that old school view, and then we have these two young characters, one light, one dark, but like not quite, like on not quite 100%, like on each side, etc., etc. That it's possible that they are going to do some revisions to the old dogma, that there shouldn't be the attachment, possession, and love, as like in romantic or like any other way. So I think that we are going to see that big change, because usually when there is going to the beginning of the things, new beginning is not going to be exactly the replica of what came before that. So there is going to be some change, and we are going to get a new lore for sure.
And I agree with that, because actually, hidden in all of the, strife between Rey and Kylo, we actually saw what the balance looks like.
Yes, exactly.
The balance once, because there is a moment, for the first time, like, we have two people who can maintain a long Force connection. This is the first time in Star Wars history. Previous Force connections, they were always fleeting. But with Rey and Kylo, they are not only sustained, they are also intensely intimate. And the two of them achieve these previously unheard of connections, not just once, but twice. And back to what you were saying about the changing of the idea, changing of the attitude towards attachment and connection, both of those Force connections were metaphorically sexual. The first one is the mind connection in the interrogation. It's sustained over a period of time, has a strong sexual subtext with, you got both characters engaging in heavy breathing, suggestive facial expressions. They're both looking each other's bodies up and down, and they got suggestive language. They got I can take anything I want. And in fact, the two of them get to such a level of intimacy, not only do they see each other's most hidden thoughts, but like we discussed, Rey gets so far into Kylo's head that she, downloads some of his abilities. As we see, suddenly she knows the Jedi mind trick with the Stormtrooper. And then when it's all over and she runs into Finn and Han, she doesn't talk about any of this, because she keeps it all private, because in a way, reading each other's minds is like the ultimate nakedness. And that kind of experience is actually rather like a sexual experience. She's not going to talk about it that easily. She doesn't even share it with Finn.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then the second point is what I kind of think is the Force consummation one. Like, they had the metaphorical marriage of him carrying her over the threshold, him abducting her in that Hades and Persephone kind of way from Takodana. And that's the Force connection at the cliffside. And it starts when he tells Rey, you need a teacher. I can show you the ways of the Force. It sounds like more he can show her the ways of the world. This is a metaphor or for a proposal of marriage and sexual connection. And keep in mind, they had already had that, because there was already a metaphorical marriage with the carrying over the threshold. And back to Hades and Persephone, that marriage was unwanted at first, but then eventually she wants him. And then, like we talked about, JJ, I'm going to say his awesome quote again, he sets the stage for all of this. She closes her eyes, and you see him looking at her, and her eyes are closed, and then she sort of lets it in. And then we got the big moment, right? The arguably forced sex moment. She and he, they have this intense, sustained mental connection, and they filmed it with, like you said, the romance indicating choker shots. They have sound edited, synchronized heartbeats. The two actors perform with these amazing facial expressions that alternate between the two of them. The mood alternates between, like, from ecstatic to passionate to awe and calm and peace. And all of this indicates that there's something more going on than a mind reading session or her powering up the Force. I mean, you know, she actually stops wearing white after this whole situation, you know.
Right.
And I have a little more, but it sounds like somebody wants to jump in at the moment.
Oh, no, I was just saying, like, along with all of the commentary, I think I'd forgotten to mention it before about those shots, is, like, you even see shaking of the shots. Like, they didn't, you know, hire somebody without a steady hand. That's there on purpose.
Yes, and it's a certain kind of movement. It's a somewhat, like, undulating up and down kind of movement, if...
Up and down oh my God, yes, for sure.
We're keeping it PG-13, so yeah.
Right, yeah.
But, you know, you put them all together. Go ahead, you finish.
Yeah, it's one of those, like, put the pieces of the puzzle together, what's going on in that scene.
Yeah, because if you add up Takedana, the interrogation, and the cliffside, they're all come together, and you could, you know, so much subtext, so much sexual awakening, that you could argue that the cliffside consummates the marriage that Kylo did. And what's even, to take it to the Force realm, on the cliffside, Force sex, consummation, what have you, they both fluctuate color-wise in red and pink and blue, symbolizing how both, because at various times his face is blue, he's got blue lightsaber in his eye, her face is sometimes blue, but it's also sometimes red. It goes back and forth, symbolizing how the dark and the light are going through them. Their union is actually, it's not about killing the light or the dark. It's about coexisting. And the Force consummation moment, think about it. It's intense, it's intimate, and it's balanced. Everybody is just kind of like there in the moment. And, you know, it's only when she lets the dark side get the edge that it falls apart. And she, you know, and she beats him, and there's still, like, a lot of sexual elements in that, but it's not balanced anymore. And only when the ravine opens does she, you know, calm down and start to take in what happened. And he, you know, unlike a typical Darksider, does not look like, you know, he's super angry with her. He actually looks sad and sorry to see her go. And so the movie actually leaves their Force affiliation future unsettled. But I think that joining on the cliffside, think about it, both are in a state of pleasure and peace as the dark and light flow through them. And it shows that not only can that state of balance be achieved, think about it, nobody else in Star Wars has done that, like that kind of, maybe they've done it in the cartoons now, but the movies know where the light and the dark are flowing together. And these two are the ones who have actually achieved it. And so as such, Kylo and Rey and their Force consummation are united in a way by some spiritual marriage, and the dark and light can flow freely through them and coexist in a state of balance. And that moment was a microcosm of what is needed with the Force on a macro level. They've done it. They've done the balance in the little moment. They have to go through some sort of trial to bring the balance to the Force tree. And I don't know what that will be, but, you know, we've seen it. We've seen what the balance looks like for a few seconds.
No, that's fantastic. I mean, like what you said, that we've seen what balance looks like for a few seconds. It's fantastic. I mean, like the colors merged, you know, like they're calm, you know, like you see those cross sabers in their eyes that symbolize the oneness. You know, like it's perfect. And that's exactly, I mean, like one of many things that we discussed that codes them as the first couple, because Adam and Eve concept, the concept of the first couple, is much bigger than a romance. Anyone can have a romance, but you can't have the first couple with just anyone. Like it's very few, very special, and like it's like once in a generation. So in this trilogy, this is the first couple. And I just want to read some quotes from actual critics, so that our listeners and viewers don't think that we are like fangirling, like shooting, etc. Like, yes, actual critics, like reputable critics, are commented on the sexual subtext of those scenes. So this is from Reverse Shot. It says, okay, let me see. They chase each other around the woods, niftily felling trees with their flaming weapons like slow-motion warriors in a Zhang Yimou film, and again stare at each other, this time with crossed and crackling sabers, air-pairing undefined heat. It feels like something, and it also looks like something, in that it doesn't mean to overly resemble anything we've seen before in the franchise. Abrams has an idea here, or at least an out-of-bounds reference, and it shows. And previously he said, there is a quasi-sexual chemistry between the strapped-down heroine and the handsome Gargamel-cloaked villain, which seems to arise not from the plot imperative, but from the electricity passed between two compelling people in proximity. That chemistry is resumed during an epic saber battle in the woods, etc., etc. So another one is from Time magazine, and it says, in one of the movie's finest moments, Ren, unmasked and intense, engages Rey in a major stare-down and unholy duel between the light side of the Force and the dark. The sexual energy between them is strange and unsettling, like a theremin sonata only they can hear. So there you go. The critics have spoken.
Right. It's not just people seeing things. If you saw it, you were meant to, because it was put there on purpose. And then, did you guys have anything else to add before we get into some other examples, like some precedents that have been set in that modern fantasy stuff?
No, I'm go ahead with that. I don't know if Vay has anything.
Yeah, go ahead, definitely. And I think we really covered everything.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about mythology here today, and I want to reiterate, Star Wars it's not sci-fi, it's fantasy. It is fantasy set in space. And so you're going to have the same themes show up in fantasy. Modern fantasy is basically an extension of ancient mythology. So we actually have modern fantasy stories that tackle some of these same elements, and we wanted to reference a couple that tackle kind of this Adam and Eve concept. So, Vay, can you start us off with a couple of those that you had noticed?
Yes. Like Adam and Eve concept is most famous for procreation, right? The couple has children, and there are more children, and we repopulate the world. But this concept could be done without that, more specifically, it could be done without romance. So now, in case of Rey and Kylo, I really think that such concept wouldn't be true to the story, but like I said, it could be done. And the example is Never Ending Story, the book by Michael Ende. In that story, childlike Empress and Bastian, who is from our world, and she is the queen of Fantastica, a fantasy world, witnessed the destruction of Fantastica because people from the outer world, which is our world, stopped coming to fantasy world. No imagination, no reading books, that sort of thing. So the children find themselves in the complete dark, and there is this beautiful line that I think applies to the sequel trilogy as well. When Bastian asks the childlike empress, why is it dark? And she says, in the beginning, it's always dark. So he wishes that there is light, and she grants him the wish by giving him the grain of sand that's what left of the fantasy world. And his imagination starts to create the new world. It turns into a seed, and it starts sprouting into the world again. So you have these two children, a boy and a girl, whose imagination and actually created a new world, which is also Adam and Eve concept. Another one that is also famous in modern literature is his Dark Materials trilogy, where we have characters Lyra, a girl, and Will, a boy. They are teenagers who basically defeat God in order to create the Republic of Heaven. So these characters love each other, but because we have they're from parallel universes, and at the end of the movie they have to split and never see each other again. So each will create the Republic of Heaven from their universe, and there is this famous scene where they touch each other's demons being physical manifestation of their souls. So they were also Adam and Eve characters, because they managed to create a new world in spiritual sense.
Yeah, and those are really good examples. And then the especially the demon touching I find really interesting.
And it's moving. It's so moving. It's like one of the most famous scenes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then kind of along with that demon touching, we see something really similar in the movie The Dark Crystal, which is, again, it's really heavy on the Jungian, and it's all about balance. But you have these two characters. There's Jen and Kira, and they're the last of their kind. And then they have, after a great destruction, and then they have to create their world anew. So definite Adam and Eve figures. But what I find really interesting, a couple of tidbits from this story that I find especially interesting, there are also these characters, the Skeksis, who are the bad guys, and then the Mystics, who are the good guys. And as the movie proceeds, you sort of figured out that they're actually the same creature. They've just split into two, and they've split this crystal, and that's what caused them to split in two. And so Jen and Kira, it's their goal to get the piece that's missing from the crystal back to the crystal, and it's the dark crystal. And then when they do that, the crystal fills with light. So they brought light to the darkness, and then the Mystics and the Skeksis combine back together to become whole creatures. So they perfectly integrated their light and dark sides, and then in that way they're released from that world, that planet. And after that, the land is green and beautiful again. And then Jen and Kira, we presume, we don't actually see it on screen, but you can presume that they're going to probably start their species again. And then what was really interesting too, the other tidbit was the first time that Jen and Kira meet each other, she's wearing a hood, and she removes the hood, and it kind of reminded us of Kylo unmasking. And then the very first time that they touch each other in that scene, they start sharing memories, like they're into each other's heads. So it's the same kind of imagery. So it's, and I'm not saying that they copied off of the Dark Crystal or anything, but you see these types of influences in fantasy. So these stories are pretty common.
Well, actually, Oh, I'm sorry.
No. I mean, like, I just wanted to say that because we have Lyra and Will touch each other's demons, aka soul, in his dark materials, and then we have Jen and Kira touch for the first time and exchange their thoughts and memories, and then we have Rey and Kylo, who read each other's minds and symbolically touch each other's demons. There is obviously a pattern in fantasy in a way how Adam and Eve concept is brought to life and given a new spin.
Yeah, because I actually, as we were kidding around in the prior to the podcast, I had only seen the movie The Never-Ending Story, and I was afraid of the Dark Crystal. It looked scary to me, so I've never seen it. So now I'm very interested in it. And so I just want to confirm two things. So basically, in the Dark Crystal, you needed the Dark Crystal added to make the larger light life crystal whole again. Is that how it was?
So it's actually reverse of that. So the dark crystal was, it became dark because there was a piece of it missing.
Okay, so, okay, go ahead.
And then you put the piece back into it, and that's what causes it to become light again.
Oh, okay, because actually, we've talked about all this, like, light and dark stuff. So the Jedi, obviously we're not there's no adding in of blowing up planets into making the balance. But what did the Jedi have missing? They had like the emotion and the love, and you can have passion and strong feelings and fight for your family and have righteous anger without going and killing a bunch of people. You know what I mean? It can happen. So that actually, there's that piece of the puzzle, that emotional piece, that valid emotional piece is actually missing. And so, if there's a common theme in fantasy, that sounds like that could be something similar. And I also found it interesting that the two groups were basically the same people, and they have brought a lot of the extended universe back into the new canon, not everything, but part of the extended universe had a backstory that the Jedi and the Sith were the same way back when, and they had, a holy war, they had some sort of religious disagreement, and they split, and they became much more sort of radicalized in their own corners. But you can even see on the internet that there's, they call it the Gray Jedi Code or the Old Jedi Code, which actually talks about, like, gives validity to both peace and passion. It's not as, in the hindbrain as the Sith code is, or so far into the rational brain as the newer Jedi code is. So it's very interesting if they're going to bring back that concept, because it sounds like certainly other fantasies have played along those lines.
Right. So that just we just wanted to make the point that these are common themes. We've seen them before. We've seen different ways that these stories can play out, and whether it's romantic or not. But it does really seem like there's a strong theme here of this reverse Adam and Eve and beginning the world anew. Did you guys? Issa and Vey, did you have anything else that you wanted to add to this discussion today?
No, I think it's been awesome.
I just wanted to add something to what Issa said the last. It's when we talk about love, right? We know that Luke's love for his father brought him back to the light side, but somebody has to redeem romantic love, because right now when you look at the prequels, it seems like the romantic love was the reason for Anakin's downfall, so it kind of has a bad reputation, like compared to familial love, which reversed the process. So I really think that going with Adam and Eve concept, that romantic love is going to come back in a big way in the Jedi world, and get actually become as highly revered as like familial love was in the original trilogy. And another thing that I wanted to say about that is that, yes, of course, we call it reverse Amidala, but, I'm not going to go into details about that, so, yeah.
Well, also, on the family love versus, love between lovers, romantic love, in the Luke Vader story, the romantic love with Padme and Anakin was tainted. They lied. There was a lie there. Guess where there's a lie now? There's a lie with the family. If you read Bloodline, Luke, Leia, Han, they all lied to Ben about where he came from.
Oh, that's a good catch. That's a good catch.
Really?
And so that relationship, and you've talked about this, when we've discussed off podcast, that the family relationship with Ben is messed up. Luke didn't turn him, and it didn't work with the dad either. And what brings him back? It's got to be an outsider, because the family lied. There was a corruption, there was a taint there already, and so you can't sort of bring light where there's already corruption.
That makes sense. So, and also in keeping with that theme of reversal of, if love was the problem and then family healed, so then we've got a rhyming here with family was the problem and now love heals. So that makes sense.
Yes.
That makes sense, and it makes sense with
Star Wars message. That's the ultimate message of all Star Wars movies. Love heals. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Did we need to add anything else?
No, I think we're good.
Guys, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you, Isa. Thank you, Vay. It was a pleasure having you, and really huge pleasure discussing this with you. This was so cool to hash out and to talk about and research together. We wanted to thank our contributors and especially thank our viewers. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you'd like to, you can follow us on YouTube or Twitter. You can also leave comments on YouTube, leave comments on Twitter, or if you'd like, you can contact us privately at starwarsconnection09@gmail.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you. Thank you.
May the Force be with you.